At 90, the tragedy of Julie Andrews is beyond heartbreaking. Julie Andrews was never just a voice. She was a spell clear as winter light, soft as a prayer, and for 7 decades the world mistook that spell for invincibility. But legends are not made from applause. They're soldered together from secrets, breaks, and the quiet wars no one sees. Before Mary Poppins floated in with a spoonful of wonder, before Maria twirled on a mountaintop and taught the world to sing, there was Julia Elizabeth Wells, a wartime child picking notes out of rubble. She spent 14 years believing the gentle man she called Dad was her own, until one confession blew the floor out from under her life. Then came the darker fractured nights of fear behind a locked bedroom door, where the only thing that could not be taken from her was sound. That voice became a sanctuary she carried like armor. She rose anyway. Broadway bowed. Walt Disney waited. Oscars arrived, and the thunder of adoration drowned the static in her chest for a while. But the body keeps its ledgers, and fate is a meticulous accountant. A whisper of hoarseness, a routine fix, then the unimaginable. A soprano turned to ash in a single dawn. Not the end of a career, the theft of a self. What do you do when the one instrument that made the world love you no longer answers your touch? You write, you mother, you narrate, with a new timbre. You survive the silence and let it teach you another kind of music. Yet even now, as she steps into her 90s with the grace of a last curtain call, the story behind the smile still carries the ache of everything she weathered and everything she never said aloud. The world met her halo. Tonight we open the door, she kept bolted, and walk into the room where the music first saved her. Julie Andrews was not born beneath a spotlight. Long before she became the luminous emblem of grace and melody, she was simply Julia Elizabeth Wells, a fragile child navigating the ruins of post-war England. The air smelled of dust and rationed hope, and the world outside trembled with sirens and searchlights. Inside that chaos, a little girl began to hum softly, instinctively, as if music were the only thing left unbroken. She was born in Walton-on-Thames in 1935 to a schoolteacher father, Edward Wells, and a mother whose laughter once filled theaters before the war dimmed every stage. For years, Julie believed in the storybook version of her family until one evening in 1950, when her mother, Barbara, revealed a truth that shattered everything. The man she called Dad was not her father. She was the child of an affair. In that moment, innocence died, replaced by a lifelong ache for belonging. And yet, from that pain grew an almost sacred resilience. She didn't rebel, she refined. She didn't shout, she sang. The voice that would one day enchant the world began as an act of defiance against silence. Julie's early life was a storm disguised as a melody. War, poverty, fractured family, and a stepfather whose charm masked something far more dangerous. But amid the fear and uncertainty, one thing never wavered: the sound. Her voice became the only truth she could trust, the bridge between chaos and control, between the little girl she was and the legend she would become. As bombs fell, she sang in shelters. As her world cracked open, her tone grew purer. It was as if fate itself was forging her instrument in fire, preparing her for a destiny neither she nor the world could yet imagine. Her stepfather, Ted Andrews, was a vaudeville performer, charismatic on stage, volatile off it. He praised her gift, but behind closed doors carried darkness that no child should have to face. Twice, he crossed an unforgivable line. After that, Julie began locking her bedroom door at night, not out of modesty, but survival. Her mother turned a blind eye, caught between denial and dependence. The war outside felt safer than the nights within those walls. And yet, from that private terror, Julie found her anchor. Her voice became her fortress. Singing wasn't just performance, it was protection, escape, and redemption all at once. Ted, ironically, was the first to recognize her extraordinary gift. Beneath his cruelty, he saw something divine. He pushed her to train, to perform, to rise above the ruins of their home. The cruel paradox: the man who hurt her also became the gatekeeper of her genius. Under the guidance of Madame Lillian Stiles Allen, a strict but nurturing vocal coach, Julie's voice evolved into something supernatural. It wasn't just beautiful, it was pure. The clarity of a bell, the range of an angel. At 12, she stunned London audiences in Starlight Roof. At 13, she sang before the King and Queen of England, the youngest soloist ever to do so. Behind each note was pain transformed into purpose. Every performance, a reclamation of power. She wasn't chasing applause, she was rewriting her own survival into sound. And as she sang, she began to believe in the impossible that maybe, just maybe, music could rewrite destiny itself. At just 19, Julie Andrews left behind the gray comfort of England for the bright unknown of America. It was 1954, and the Atlantic crossing wasn't just a journey, it was a rebirth. She arrived with nothing but a suitcase, a voice like crystal, and a determination forged in the fires of her past. Broadway was ruthless, but Julie had been through worse. Her debut came in The Boyfriend, a charming musical that gave the audience a glimpse of her talent, but to those who truly listened, it was clear they were witnessing something rare. Her range was not just vocal, it was emotional. She could make innocence sound powerful and heartbreak sound divine. The New York critics hailed her as a revelation, and suddenly, this quiet English girl became the talk of the town. Then came My Fair Lady. The role of Eliza Doolittle demanded perfection, accent, stamina, emotion. It was a part that frightened even the most seasoned actresses, but Julie transformed every fear into fire. Night after night, she carried that stage with grace and fury, metamorphosing before the audience's eyes. The production ran for more than 2,700 performances, and Broadway didn't just applaud, it surrendered. Yet when Hollywood came calling to adapt My Fair Lady into a film, Julie's triumph turned to heartbreak. She was passed over for Audrey Hepburn, not because she lacked talent, but because she lacked fame. The decision sliced deep. The role she had breathed life into was taken from her, the applause replaced by silence. But life has a strange rhythm. While one door closed, another opened, one painted in pastel and floating through the clouds. Walt Disney had seen her perform and knew instinctively that she was his Mary Poppins. When she hesitated, Disney waited. When she finally said yes, destiny moved. The film was released in 1964, and the world was spellbound. Julie Andrews wasn't acting, she was becoming. Her warmth, wit, and effortless joy made Mary Poppins immortal. She won the Academy Award for Best Actress, triumphing over none other than Audrey Hepburn. It wasn't revenge, it was poetic justice. She had sung her way through trauma, rejection, and heartbreak, and emerged not just victorious, but transformed. Her rise was not about fame, it was about reclaiming faith in herself. From the moment she opened her umbrella and ascended into the London sky, Julie Andrews was no longer just a performer. She was legend. Hollywood had seen stars before, but none like Julie Andrews. She wasn't fire and scandal, she was light and discipline, a paradox of purity and power. After Mary Poppins, she became the symbol of a new kind of stardom, refined, commanding, and irresistibly human. The following year, 1965, she stepped into another role that would etch her name into eternity: The Sound of Music. As Maria von Trapp, she wasn't merely acting, she was channeling something sacred. The film became an anthem of hope in a wounded post-war world. Audiences didn't just watch it, they lived it. Her voice, stretched over the Austrian hills, became the heartbeat of millions. The film earned 5 Oscars and became one of the highest-grossing movies in history, but its true success lived in the hearts of those who found strength in her joy. Behind the camera, the perfection was punishing. Each take on those mountain peaks came with bruises, exhaustion, and relentless wind from the helicopter blades that whipped her to the ground. Yet Julie never complained. To her, art was not performance, it was endurance. She carried the weight of every scene like a hymn. By her early 30s, Julie was a global phenomenon. She graced magazine covers, her name synonymous with elegance and integrity. Her voice could silence rooms, her smile could command them. She followed her triumphs with Thoroughly Modern Millie, the Americanization of Emily, and later, the ambitious Victoria, a daring performance that redefined gender, identity, and courage on screen. Critics called her a national treasure. Co-stars called her steel wrapped in silk. Walt Disney called her the voice of heaven. But fame came with its quiet taxes. Julie was meticulous, almost too perfect for an industry that feasted on flaws. Behind every public grace note was private pressure, the relentless demand to be spotless, kind, unbreakable. At home, she longed for normalcy. Her daughter Emma grounded her. So did her husband, Tony Walton, though their marriage, stretched by fame and distance, began to fray. Yet even as her personal life trembled, her career soared higher than ever. By the late 1960s, Julie Andrews was not just the face of Hollywood, she was its conscience. Her films became modern fairy tales, but her story was never as simple as Happily Ever After. Because while the world crowned her Queen of Song, fate was already writing the cruelest note of all, the one that would one day take that crown away. The tragedy of Julie Andrews did not arrive with thunder. It came quietly, like a whisper that grew into a storm. By the 1990 seconds, she was still adored, still luminous, still the symbol of everything gentle and good in a world that had grown colder. But deep within, her greatest gift, the voice that had carried her through war, heartbreak, and triumph, began to falter. It started as a faint hoarseness during her Broadway run in Victor, Victoria. Doctors assured her it was nothing serious, just benign nodules that could be easily removed. The surgery was routine, they said, simple, safe. Julie believed them, because why wouldn't she? Her voice had always been her ally, her most faithful companion, until that day in 1997 when she woke up to silence. The damage was irreversible. The crystalline soprano that once soared across continents was gone, erased in a single, devastating operation. She later described that moment not as a loss, but as a death. It was as though a part of my identity had been stolen, she confessed. I didn't know who I was without that sound. Imagine building an entire life upon a gift so divine it defines you, and then losing it overnight. The applause faded, not because people stopped loving her, but because she could no longer give them what had once defined her magic. She withdrew from the stage. Interviews grew sparse. The woman who had taught the world to sing was now trapped in a silence that no one else could hear. Blake Edwards, her husband and creative partner, became her anchor through the darkness. But even his presence couldn't fill the void. Nights turned into battles with memory. She would lie awake, feeling the ghost of her old voice in her throat, as if her body still remembered how to sing but no longer had the strength. 4 more surgeries brought no salvation, only pain, frustration, and a growing sense of betrayal. In 1999, she filed a malpractice suit against the surgeons in Mount Sinai Hospital, alleging she was never warned of the risks. The case was settled, but no amount of justice could repair what was lost. The world saw her smile and composure, but beneath that calm lived an endless grief. Her daughter, Emma, would later say that her mother didn't rage, she simply went quiet. The same silence that had once saved her as a child now became her prison. And yet, in that very silence, a different kind of strength began to bloom. Because Julie Andrews had faced the unthinkable before. She had been broken and rebuilt herself from pain more than once. And this time, she chose to rise again, not as a singer, but as a storyteller. When Julie Andrews lost her voice, the world expected her to fade. Instead, she began again. She didn't chase what was gone, she built something new from the ruins. The silence that once crushed her became the soil for her second act. She turned to writing, co-authoring more than 30 children's books with her daughter, Emma Walton Hamilton. Each page carried echoes of her old music, gentle rhythms, warmth, and wisdom disguised as fairy tales. These stories, she said, are my way of still singing. And they were. They became lullabies made of ink, written for the world's children instead of sung to them. Julie also returned to the microphone, but in a different form. Her voice, altered by time and pain, became richer, huskier, more human. No longer an instrument of perfection, it carried the gravity of survival. In the Shrek films, she became Queen Lillian. In Bridgerton, she narrated society's scandals with elegance and quiet fire. Even through animation and narration, her presence filled every frame. She could no longer soar in melody, but she could still move hearts. At home, her days slowed into grace. After Blake Edwards passed away in 2010, she carried on with quiet dignity, speaking of him not as loss, but as love that had merely changed form. "We were each other's safe place," she once said. "That doesn't end. It just becomes something invisible." Her house became her sanctuary, a refuge of books, memories, and the laughter of grandchildren. She kept her late husband's director's chair beside her writing desk, a small reminder of their shared creativity. Those who visited her described her presence as radiant, not fragile. The same resilience that once guided her through the wreckage of childhood now defined her twilight years. Even in her 90s, she continues to nurture others. As artistic director of the Bay Street Theater in New York, she mentors young performers, passing on lessons learned through joy and ruin alike. She funds research into vocal cord restoration, determined that no one else should lose their voice the way she did. The legend who once filled opera houses now fills libraries. The woman who once sang for kings now writes for children. The soprano became a sage, and though she no longer stands beneath spotlights, Julie Andrews still shines more softly, more truly than ever before. Julie Andrews' legacy isn't just about the films she made, it's about what they meant. To a world scarred by war, she was light. To children who grew up in chaos, she was safety. To dreamers everywhere, she was proof that grace could survive grief. Her name became synonymous with excellence, but her story carried something deeper: the power to endure without bitterness. Mary Poppins and The Sound of Music were not merely movies, they were emotional landmarks. Generations found solace in her voice, a reminder that kindness could be strong and strength could be kind. Even decades later, her influence ripples through culture like an unending echo. Her posture, diction, and dignity became the blueprint for cinematic elegance. Every actress who balances charm with courage, every singer who blends artistry with integrity, owes a silent debt to Julie Andrews. She redefined what it meant to be a leading lady. In an industry that rewarded scandal and spectacle, she built a career on restraint and authenticity. She never chased headlines. She built a legacy of respect. Hollywood, ever fickle, bowed to her because she represented what it could never mass-produce: sincerity. And her reach extended far beyond film. Through her books, her voice acting, and her mentorship, she shaped imaginations that will never know the world without her shadow upon it. Children who first met her through the Shrek films or the soundtracks of Mary Poppins later discovered her humanity, the woman who turned silence into meaning. Culturally, she became more than an actress. She became a moral compass. Her career was proof that talent without humility collapses, but humility with talent can change generations. In 2000, she was named a Dame Commander of the Order of the British Empire, an honor that felt less like a crown and more like acknowledgement of a lifetime of quiet greatness. And yet, her most enduring impact may be emotional, not historical. Because when the world hears her voice, whether soaring in song or whispering in narration, it feels something rare in modern fame: purity. Not naive, not sanitized, pure in spirit. Julie Andrews didn't just define an era. She defined endurance itself. Julie Andrews' life feels like a symphony of contradictions, discipline and tenderness, tragedy and triumph, silence and song. She is one of those rare figures whose pain never curdled into bitterness. Instead, she turned every wound into art, every loss into light. And that's what makes her story not only heartbreaking, but profoundly human. For many, Julie will always be the pristine figure twirling on an Austrian mountaintop, the perfect nanny who floated through London skies. But behind those immortal roles was a survivor, one who had endured betrayal, abuse, loss, and the unthinkable erasure of her own gift. Yet she never sought pity, she sought purpose. There's something almost sacred about that. Because in a world obsessed with reinvention, Julie Andrews didn't reinvent herself, she remembered herself. She allowed grief to exist beside grace, and she taught us that strength isn't the absence of suffering, but the courage to keep creating through it. We often say legends fade, but Julie never did. She evolved. When her voice was taken, she spoke. When her songs were silenced, she wrote. When the spotlight dimmed, she built new ones for others. And maybe that's the truest mark of greatness, not how long the applause lasts, but how deeply your story continues to echo. Her tragedy was real. Her silence was unbearable, but her resilience was astonishing. She showed the world that losing your gift doesn't mean losing your worth, that identity isn't confined to talent, but found in the will to begin again. Julie Andrews stands as proof that sometimes the most powerful notes are the ones you can no longer sing. There's a certain silence that follows greatness, a silence not of absence, but of completion. Julie Andrews lives inside that silence now. It hums through her laughter, softens her words, lingers between her pauses. The world once listened to her voice. Now, it listens to her wisdom. In her ninth decade, she moves gently through the world she once conquered, carrying within her every note ever sung, every heartbreak ever endured. She doesn't chase the past, yet she carries it like a melody only she can hear. The child who once locked her door against fear became the woman who unlocked hearts across generations. The girl who sang to survive became the legend who taught the world what survival sounds like. Her story is not a fairy tale, it's a requiem turned into a lullaby. There were no perfect endings, only beautiful continuations. From the ashes of her stolen voice rose something quieter, but infinitely stronger. Grace. And when we think of Julie Andrews, we don't remember the loss. We remember the light. The way she stood on that mountaintop and made the wind itself seem to listen. The way she smiled through tears, reminding us that gentleness is not weakness, and that silence can be its own kind of song. The curtain has not fallen, it has only dimmed. Somewhere, beyond the noise of the modern world, you can still hear her spirit humming faintly, a tune of endurance, of love, of impossible hope. Some stories are meant to be sung, others whispered through time. This one was both. Some stories were never meant to be known. But now,